Imagine Jesus walking into this room today and he asks you a simple question. What do you want
me to do for you? What would you say? Maybe you would ask for more money, more time, better circumstances, a different job, healing.
peace? Or would you ask for something else?
In Mark 10, we met a man who is sitting by the roadside. His name is Bartimaeus. He's blind, he's a beggar, and he's dependent on others. And yet, when he hears that Jesus is passing by, he makes a decision. He cries out. He says, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And that cry becomes the beginning of a completely different life. The theme that I want us to hear today is a really, really simple one. They all have been all summer. To choose life with Jesus. Because when Jesus calls you, you have a choice. You can stay where you are, or you can get up and follow him. Mark tells us that Bartimaeus was sitting beside the road. He was blind. He couldn't see where he was going. He couldn't work in the way that others could. He relied on other people to help him. So he sat by the road begging. And maybe that is more than just a physical description of his condition. Because sometimes people can be physically alive, but spiritually sitting by the road. They're existing, they're getting through days, they're paying bills, inside something is missing. They're doing all the normal things, but inside something is missing. They've lost hope. They've lost purpose. Maybe they've stopped believing that life can be different. Perhaps you've been there. Perhaps you are there. You can look fine on the outside when feeling completely stuck on the inside. But then Bartimaeus hears something. Jesus is passing by, and everything changes. Because when you hear about Jesus, you have a choice. Bartimaeus hears the crowd. He asks what's happening, and they tell him Jesus of Nazareth is passing by. Bartimaeus doesn't just hear the information, he responds to it. He cries out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." He recognizes something about Jesus. Because if you notice, he calls him the Son of David. He's recognizing Jesus as the promised king. Bartimaeus may not have been able to see Jesus physically, but he could see something about him spiritually. And sometimes that's what faith looks like. You may not understand everything. You may not have all the answers. You may not know exactly what tomorrow looks like. But you can still recognize Jesus is the answer. And when you recognize that, you have a choice. You can call out to him, or you can stay where you are. But we don't let crowds happens. Because Bartimaeus cries out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." And what happens? People tell him to be quiet. They rebuke him. Essentially, they're saying, stop making a scene. Don't bother Jesus, be quiet. But Bartimaeus refuses to be silenced. In fact, Mark says he cried out even more loudly. And I really, really love that line. Because the louder they tell him to stop, the louder he calls for Jesus. And sometimes choosing life means refusing to listen to the voices that tell you to stay where you are. Maybe you've heard voices saying things like, oh, you'll never change. You've gone too far this time. God couldn't forgive someone like you. That's just who you are. You'll always struggle with this thing. But Bartimaeus teaches us something. Don't let the crowd keep you from Jesus. If you need mercy, come to Jesus. If you need forgiveness, come to Jesus. If you need hope, come to Jesus. If you need a new beginning, come to Jesus. Don't allow shame to silence you or fear to silence you. Don't allow other people's opinions to silence you. Come to Jesus. And then Jesus stops and something beautiful happens. There's a crowd around Jesus. People are following him. People are talking. People are pressing in. But Jesus hears one desperate voice. And Jesus stops. And he says, call him. The same people who had told Bartimaeus to be quiet now say, take heart, get up, he's calling you, come on. What a change in them. A moment earlier, they had been telling them to be quiet. And now they're telling him, get up. Jesus is calling you. And maybe that's a word for someone today. You might think that Jesus doesn't notice you. You might think your problem is too small. You might think your past is too complicated. But Bartimaeus reminds us, Jesus hears the cry that other people ignore. Jesus sees the person other people overlook. And Jesus stops for the person sitting at the side of the road. But then Mark tells us something else. When Bartimaeus hears that Jesus is calling him, he throws his cloak aside, jumps to his feet, and comes to Jesus. He gets up. And that matters. Because there comes a moment where you have to move. Jesus calls you, can offer mercy, offer forgiveness, offer new life, but you still have to respond to that. Bartimaeus could have stayed where he was. He could have said, I'm too comfortable here. I'm too afraid. What if Jesus doesn't heal me? What if it doesn't work? But he gets up and he chooses life. And sometimes following Jesus begins with a simple decision. I'm getting up. I'm getting up from my bitterness. I'm getting up from my shame. I'm getting up from my past. I'm getting up from fear. I'm getting up from the things that have kept me stuck. I'm getting up and I'm going to Jesus. Because Mark especially tells us that Bartimaeus threw his cloak aside. Why bother telling us? His cloak was probably important to him. As a beggar, it may have been what he used to collect money. It was a part of his old life. It represented the place where he had been sitting. And when Jesus called him, he left it behind. And there's something truly powerful there. Because when Jesus calls us into new life, there are things we may need to leave behind. Old habits, old identities, old attitudes, old sins, old bitterness, old excuses, old ways of thinking. Sometimes we want Jesus to give us a new life while sitting, holding tightly on to the old one. But Bartimaeus throws off his cloak. He gets up and he comes to Jesus. Choosing life means choosing to leave some things behind. Bartimaeus comes to Jesus and Jesus asks him, "What do you want me to do for you?"
Jesus already knows he's blind. Jesus already knows
what he needs. But Jesus asks the question. Why? Because Jesus invites Bartimaeus to speak, to ask, and to respond. And Bartimaeus says, "Rabbi, I want to see." And Jesus says, "Go, your faith has healed you." And immediately Bartimaeus receives his sight. But notice what happens next. He doesn't simply receive his sight and go back to his old life. Mark says immediately he received his sight and followed Jesus along the road. That's the real miracle. He doesn't just receive something from Jesus, he then chooses to follow Jesus. His eyes are opened, and now his life has a new direction. And that's what Jesus wants to do in you and me. He doesn't simply want to make our circumstances better. He wants to give us a new direction, a new purpose, a new identity, and a new life. Because the greatest gift isn't simply what Jesus can give you. The greatest gift is Jesus himself. The story of Bartimaeus is ultimately a story about choice. He could stay where he was, or he could get up. He could listen to the crowd, or he could listen to Jesus. He could remain defined by his past, or he could step into a new future. He could sit beside the road, or he could follow Jesus on the road. And today, we face that same choice.
and because he offers
Us life in him. A life of forgiveness, a life of purpose, a life of grace, and a life of hope. A life that has meaning beyond our current circumstances. So the question isn't simply, do you believe in Jesus? The question really is, will you follow Jesus? Because faith isn't just hearing, faith responds, and faith gets up, and faith follows. Maybe today you feel like Bartimaeus. Maybe you've simply become comfortable with a life that isn't what God intended for you. But today you hear something. Jesus is passing by. And Jesus is calling. So don't stay beside the road. Get up. Come to Jesus. Leave the cloak behind and let him give you life. Bartimaeus didn't just receive his miracle, he followed Jesus. It didn't end with Bartimaeus got what he wanted, he was no longer blind. But with Bartimaeus followed Jesus along the road. Don't just come to Jesus for what he can do for you. Come to Jesus because he is Lord. Don't just ask him to change your circumstances. Ask him to change you. Don't just ask him to open doors. Ask him to open your eyes. Don't just ask for blessings. Ask for a life that follows him. Because there is a choice before every one of us. We can remain where we are, or we can
listen to the crowd, or we can listen to Jesus.
We can hold on to the old life, or we can leave the cloak behind. We can stay beside the road, or we can follow Jesus along the road. So today, hear the call of Jesus. Get up. I am calling you. And choose life. We've got 4 people today who are making that choice to choose life. Choose life with Jesus. They're choosing forgiveness, choosing grace, choosing hope, choosing purpose. But above all, we choose Jesus, because there is no greater life than a life lived with Jesus.